Hello and welcome to today's webcast. My name is Casey Gamble, and I'm the Education Assistant at American Retirement Association, and I will be your host today. We have scheduled 50 minutes for this webcast, including a Q&A. Please type any questions you have for our presenters in the question panel on your dashboard. All questions will be answered both during and after the presentation. To receive continuing education credit, please know that you must watch this webcast in its entirety. Please note that if you are watching this event in a group setting and did not individually log in, have your training coordinator confirm your attendance by sending an email to me, Casey Gamble, at kgamble@usaretirement.org, and I will have the CE manually uploaded. We are also pleased to announce that we now offer SHRM CE for PSA webcasts, and we have the approval from HRCI. Today's topic is PSBA webcast, open enrollment, and I will now hand it over to our presenter.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Great. Thank you, Casey. We will get kicked off here today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're very excited to bring this topic generally of open enrollment, obviously right before the season starts, but we're going to get into some sort of interesting details and twists on it that we hope you'll find very interesting. So we want to start off just with introducing ourselves. And Kevin, I'm going to ask you first of all, as one of our presenters today, what is your background and what makes you qualified to speak on these topics?
Thank you very much, Ann. I guess great question. First of all, my name is Kevin Robertson. I'm Chief Revenue Officer for HSA Bank. And I guess qualifications really come down to, for more than 25 years, I've been working in insurance, employee benefits, and financial services. And in the course of that 25 plus years of experience, I've worked with thousands of employer plans from all different angles and aspects, from design to deployment to sunsetting and everything in between. In that process, I guess that I have presented and educated to countless employees. Quite honestly, I don't know how many. Both during and after an open enrollment. So I guess I have a unique experience because, quite honestly, I have a deep experience in the entire benefits ecosystem, both on the retirement side and the medical side, and all the kind of related components and partners and inputs there as well. So hopefully that gives me a qualification. I guess I myself have gone through open enrollment many times, and having myself family's needs, obviously that's really the qualifications are. So, Ann, let me flip it back to you then. What is your background? What are your qualifications here?
Yeah, actually, that's a great. I like that point you made. I think to some degree we're all experts to the degree that we've gone through open enrollment, and we've experienced kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So yes, my name's Ann Brisk. I actually work for Kevin, and I am our Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at HSA Bank. So I focus on bringing new partnerships to our organization, but also to the market. And I guess what I would say is I too have lived kind of in the benefits space and really focused on, I am passionate about the idea of everyone having an HSA. And I think ultimately, how we deploy benefits and how we communicate them make a big difference in people's lives, because ultimately if they select a high deductible health plan, which right now that's how you get an HSA, and you get one of these accounts and you start to put money in it, it can really be a valuable tool. And I personally have experienced being very glad that I have managed to save money over the 10 plus years that I've had an HSA personally. So I think all of those things kind of make me qualified, but also, just living and breathing this topic every day. So on that note, Kevin, you want to walk us through the agenda?
Yeah, so again, today's topic, and it's really about getting the most of your open enrollment. However, I just want to make sure you guys understand that we're not just going to be talking about the traditional open enrollment. We're really going to be talking about a number of different products that transcend a particular time frame. They just happen to be very timely right now, as a lot of the employers and advisors on the phone are probably thinking about and right now in the midst of planning for the next open enrollment that is probably coming up this fall for most folks. The topics we're going to talk about today really are on the screen here. The first is really this concept around maximizing engagement. This is to me all about the how and why to get the most out of your benefits, both from an employee and an employer's perspective. The notion of optimizing benefits, because really open enrollment and the optimization of benefits isn't about picking a plan, it's about picking the right solution, right? The third component is going to talk largely around strategy and understanding how to align all of this with your larger strategy around benefits and to drive outcomes both for yourself and employees. And finally, talking about how to maintain this momentum and actually build on top of that as the year goes on. I think you'll understand and see that all of these topics really transcend the size and the market, and they aren't necessarily product specific either. Although a couple of case studies or a couple of examples we'll talk about might be somewhat concentrated on consumer-directed healthcare, I think you'll see that it actually applies equally to all employers, all sizes, all markets. So with thinking of that, we'll turn to our very first topic, and that's maximize engagement. So Ann, I'm going to tee this one up for you, and maybe if you can get us started talking about what maximize engagement is and why this might matter to the audience.
Yeah, and I think this choice of words is actually kind of spot on because, I mean, frankly, we hear these words used a lot, but the idea of maximizing and engagement kind of are different together, right? So we're always trying to engage our employees. We're always trying to sort of help them maximize the value of their benefits, but now we want to maximize their engagement in those benefits. And we're going to talk about some really good reasons why it's worthwhile to do that. I think a lot of times in the employer benefits world, we look for sort of cause and effect, so wellness solutions, things like that. We want to see this ROI. And I think one of the points we're going to talk about here is there's not always an obvious ROI, but some of the things that you do can actually have impact far-reaching in your business in terms of revenue and productivity. So first of all, let's define employee engagement. These words are pretty simple, but I think first of all, we really want to make people take action. So actually interacting in the decision-making process. And you're going to hear us talk about a couple of key concepts here. If you're using passive enrollment, meaning they don't have to if they never even touch a button, they're automatically enrolled in what they had last year. I would argue that's not engagement, right? That's just somebody saying, I'm too busy, I'm not going to worry about it. Even though these decisions that they're making, even though they're not actively doing anything, actually have a pretty big impact on them. And then the second component of that is, okay, they've gone through and they've done something, they've used tools and they've looked at what their options are, but now turning those decisions into action. And they're, having a nice connection between I've gone through and I've made decisions, and now I'm going to actually go through this benefits enrollment process. And we always want that to be as easy as possible on the actual enrollment piece of it, but we really want to make sure people are spending the time to think about which benefits they're selecting and why. So why should we do this? Here's a really nice surprise, and this is data that has come out of surveys that ultimately sort of connect those employees that indicate they are very engaged with, how their businesses actually perceive them in terms of productivity, sales, and profitability. So again, this is where that sort of connection can occur. If you're engaging people here, you might actually be getting great outcomes, for your business. And I know especially for HR and benefits people, it's sometimes hard to make a connection between what you're doing here and how it's actually impacting business, but you have opportunities to do that. And one of the things we're going to talk about post open enrollment is surveying and trying to see if people engaged, how they engaged, and then connecting that to those employees that you believe are probably your higher productivity employees. So obviously a lot of connections to try to make there, but the reality is, these decisions you're making now can have big impacts on your overall company. And then another nice kind of surprise, and I think also cost savings aspect of this, engaged employees stay, right? We are in an unprecedented period following, a year of pandemic where people are turning in their turning in their badge and going somewhere else, right? There's a lot of just sort of life reflection happening, and people are making decisions kind of spur of the moment even to say, I'm done. I'm going to go do something else, whatever that is. And we've got an employment market that is actually rewarding that, because there's lots of jobs available, lots of open jobs that employers are trying to fill. So great time to be an employee, kind of tough time to be an employer. So, the idea of you want happy employees, happy in their jobs, you want to pay them well, but if you can engage them and they can actually see and feel all of the things you're doing for them, they're much less likely to leave. And that is a critical thing to look at right now when turnover is at an all-time high for organizations, not because of anything they're doing wrong or different. It's just that suddenly the game changed right after the past year that we've had. So another kind of key thing we like to talk about is you really need to know who your employees are. And we have this kind of simple graphic up here. But what we're really talking about is, what are the various sort of groups of income levels that you have? So do you have frontline workers? Do you have management workers? Do you have unions? All the different sort of groups based on income. You've also got different generations working for you. Depending on what type of company you are, that might span one generation, it might span two generations, or sometimes up to three, right? So of the various generations that you've kind of got, across that mix. And it's important to just know who they are so that you can meet them where they are. And that's important. Like if you just have one tool available and it's online and that should suffice for everybody as far as trying to select benefits and maybe go through some sort of decision-making process, that's probably not going to do it if you've got certain generations that would prefer to actually speak to someone or engage in a different type of tool that's not necessarily online. So maybe, going back to the old benefits book, some people still like to have that in front of them and to go through it and circle and make choices, right? So you want to be thinking about sort of meeting your various different demographic groups of employees where they're at, and think about the tools from that perspective. That's where consultants and brokers can help a lot too, because they should be bringing these types of ideas to you. Here's kind of one added aspect as you're thinking about your employee base and as they're moving through their employment life cycle. There is a retirement savings gap that is very prevalent, and we've got lots of stats that basically show it. Most people believe they're going to work far longer than they'll be able to. So they may think they're going to work till 67, 68. Most people actually retire at the average age of about 62. The reality is, specifically for healthcare costs, the average 65-year-old couple is going to need hundreds of thousands of dollars just to pay for those. They can pay for them out of a 401k, which is how we're used to doing it today. So save money in all your different savings vehicles and then pay for it and pay taxes. Or they have the option of obviously getting an HSA at some point during their employment. The main point here is you need to be thinking about getting your employees ready for retirement so that they will leave when they're ready, right? You don't want people working beyond their capabilities, and you want them ready to go. It's also good for employers when you have sort of normal, healthy turnover that comes with an aging population. So on that note, this will be one of our interactive parts of this webinar. I do want to just put up a polling question, if everybody can sort of pull up their poll there. So are your employees going to be ready for retirement? And the answers are yes, 100%. I know they're ready. Maybe they're cautious, but comfortable. No, we know we need to do a lot more to help them. Or the last answer, which is fair, is I actually have no idea. So let us know what you think on that.
And Casey, I know you may have to take control and push the poll question to the audience.
Yeah, has that happened? Okay, so I'm not totally sure if that worked. Does anyone know?
Unfortunately, I don't think it is in here. But why don't we just? I think, and what I think we could do is maybe talk about what every single person on this call probably had one of the answers. Maybe we just talk about the answers to those.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the reality is it's probably all of the above. I think it's fair to say, based on sort of the pace and the work environment you're in, you may actually not really know the answers to this, right? You just haven't, taken time to really understand how prepared people are for retirement. Generally, you're going to look at that with your retirement benefits that you offer. So it may be kind of, also, be something that you're focused on, but it's not necessarily related to the benefits piece. Ideally, more and more employers are starting to add more types of tools to help their employees get ready. I know we've recently, we're in the process of introducing a retirement readiness solution that's focused specifically on healthcare costs. A lot of people just don't know, for instance, what Medicare covers, right? So we all think it covers everything. It turns out it doesn't. This is where we want to start introducing tools that can just help our employees and also, frankly, our fellow citizens just get ready, for what they're facing in retirement. And then for anyone that does feel like their employees are very ready, you've given them all the right ways to save and they've done it. Good for you. You're well ahead of the curve, and we certainly applaud you for that. So, okay. So Kevin, let's now kind of switch into the benefits themselves. So how they're constructed, and some key things that employers should be thinking about as they consider how to optimize their benefits. What do you think employers are kind of missing most when it comes to this topic? Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, so great question. I think that open enrollment, especially just it there's so much that has to happen in such a short amount of time that for many employers, it really is about the mechanics of picking a plan or option, right? But what we said on the beginning of the call was optimization, this concept of being optimized in the benefits, isn't about picking a plan. It's about picking the right plan or options for a given scenario, and then really keeping it optimized as your employees go through their lifetime life cycles, life changes that will inevitably happen during their lifetimes, keeping them optimized to that scenario. Now, if you think about it, employers can play a pivotal role here because they have a lot of levers that they can pull. They probably fall into a couple of different categories. Obviously, first would be their plan designs, and when that connotation probably has more to do with the health plan mechanics and everything from premium and deductible and network and a number of different components, right? But that really quickly then bleeds over into the incentive structures. In other words, the economics that they have at their disposal. And it doesn't matter if they're self-funded or fully insured, just because they have a lot of things that they can control. For instance, employee contribution to premium and things like that, all the way down to if they have an HSA structure, what type of matching strategy they might use, or other types of wellness incentives and things that they have. And then, of course, all of the different engagement levers that we're going to dive into a couple of these things here. But to me, the main concept that you have to start from is understanding that this is, for the employer's perspective, this is really about facilitating action, right? So we had talked before about that concept where the employer needs to facilitate not just engagement just by thinking about something, and then activation about that concept of taking it one step further and actually putting it into play. That's really an important component. Now, what we have found over the years of just dealing with tens of thousands of employers is that there really are four key areas of optimization that we found are pretty universal across, again, all employer sizes and plan circumstances. And the first is really to require an active enrollment. In other words, don't just put everybody into the default into what they've always had and just have them continue year after year after year with small tweaks. At some point, at some level, you got to make them make a deliberate choice. And the second bullet point reinforces and kind of dovetails with the first is you need to help them. And decision support comes in many flavors, many sizes, so on and so forth. But I want to make sure that this is not about just a math exercise. It's what I would call a scenario alignment exercise. Every individual employee's scenarios are different. The life that they have, the family that they have, the considerations that they have are unique. And to the extent that we can, make an investment to help them be optimized, right? They're going to need some assistance, and just a simple math calculator and say, hey, here's the math, just input here, and it'll tell you, some suggestions. Thinking about all flavors, all investments, I think is really important to make there. The third and the fourth bullet point, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper in a couple examples, but to me, this is really about recognizing the levers you have to pull, because there really is no better motivator than money. And the employers can use this to your advantage. Recognizing too how employees are going to interact with the process and their benefits will help identify how to facilitate involvement. So let me dive into these things a little bit more deeply. The best example from in our core universe is around HSAs, and for all intents and purposes, again, I'm going to use HSAs for the example here, but to tell you the truth, this would transcend just about anything you're trying to achieve. But from the years of experience we've developed certain best practices that seem to identify and work in regardless of the employer size, the demographics, the economics. First of all, is starting from a point where you understand what you're trying to achieve, not only for yourself, but also your employees over the long run. Identifying what's the end destination and working backwards from there in developing a multi-year strategy to get that. The second component, again, dovetails nicely with that first, is saying, okay, well, once you have that, then you can align your plan design and programs to those overall goals. So again, it doesn't matter if this is an HSA program or something else. You could scratch out the word HSA, put in anything else in there. It's the same thing. How are you possibly going to get to the destination if you don't know where the destination is and you don't have a map along the way? And you got to be deliberate about doing that. You also have to take time to understand, again, as we've said already, the unique needs of the specific employees. In other words, walk a mile in their shoes, because that really will impact what your strategy may be, or ultimately the plan that's how you're going to deploy. And finally, in the fourth and fifth best practice, again, work really well together with each other, is using those economic levers you have to your advantage in that process. If you stop and think about those economic levers, those incentives, let's dig a little bit deeper into this. The first, and I talked about before, aligning plan pricing to desired outcomes. This is, you have to be deliberate about identifying what behavior or what component you're looking to modify. For example, if you're trying to curb smoking, right, and you're going to put an aggressive smoking cessation campaign in place, then you can't be afraid of being aggressive on the smoker surcharge. And there might be components that are holistic, or there might be very, very specific components. For instance, yesterday I saw on the news that Delta Airlines had announced a vaccination surcharge for those employees that had not or have not elected to get a COVID-19 vaccination. Now, again, that's a very in-the-now topic, and it's very complex. I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I'm just using this as an example of, they're introduced and announced yesterday a $200 per month COVID-19 surcharge for those that are not vaccinated, because then they had shared that it cost them on average $40,000 for hospitalization for COVID-19, and they're covering their bases, right? So that's just an example of understanding what are you trying to drive an outcome, and then obviously align your plan to that. The second component is looking for ways for employees to get skin in the game. Again, we're talking about an HSA, for example, so considering negative elections, in other words, starting from a position where people are defaulted into making a contribution, of course, you have to give them an ability to back themselves out of that if they don't want to make a contribution. But thinking about, hey, a simple configuration of whether you're defaulting them in or out of making payroll contributions to an HSA, for example, can have a dramatic input on the outcome long term. And then again, thinking about in this case, again, if I'm looking to drive let's say, for instance, a strong improvement in employee retirement readiness, and I'm going to use the HSA as a path to get there, then, having a strong matching contribution strategy deployed with that is going to, go a long way to facilitating that outcome. And if you think about, it's not just about the plans and the economics, right? You have to think about all of those components. Remember, we had talked multiple times about the demographic piece. What I would say here is if you're going to walk a mile in your employee's shoes, don't just think about it from the economic standpoint. This is actually one that I think that is often missed. People will stop and think about, well, I'm gonna develop people like me scenarios for my employees that look like my employee demographics and call it a day. But have you really thought about what stresses they're seeing in their life? What outcomes that they're looking to have in their life and lifestyle of their family? Thinking, again, beyond the math is an important part of the demographics. The second thing is, and we've heard from employees time and time over and over again, is that, they want to have much more time and resources and help to make them make a decision, especially during open enrollment. And I think that that's been exacerbated, because everything's being done virtually, or nearly everything's being done virtually these days because of the pandemic for most employers. So if you look at your timeline of not just what you're doing for open enrollment, but new hires as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later, thinking about the adequate time, resources, and the tools that you're using. If you stop and think about those tools, I would give you an example here. And again, the tools that you use can be specific ones, or they could be economic levers. And I just wanted to use this as an example of one of the ones we were talking about before. Remember, I had said about the power of matching contributions. This is an example that for many employers, this is use of matching contributions and HSA programs has been frustratingly low, up until, recent history. But all of a sudden, employers have really caught on in terms of the power of this, because not only is it going to encourage that active role and increase balances, it also saves the employer significant amounts of money, improves that perception of the value of the benefits that an employer is bringing to the table, and when the day is done, dramatically improves the employee retirement readiness. It's a great example of how using a plan component at your disposal can drive a better, improved outcome for both the employer and the employee. That's what we're talking about in terms of using the levers and power that you have at your disposal. So, Ann, thinking about that, let's turn our attention maybe to strategy. Can you give us on the audience some tips for maybe strategy development and execution here?
Yeah. So, and I kind of think of this as, okay, so, we've kind of thought about our benefits more broadly, and now here we are, right? We're approaching open enrollment. So let's think about sort of taking all that and then making it work, right? Because unfortunately, like for us, and we'll talk about this more, but OE really is that moment when you get people to pay attention. And we use that term of OE because it's this period of time, right? We actually ideally wish, and I think we're going to talk about strategies that we could spread it more throughout the year, so that it's not the sort of crunch time. But, I like this vision because it really is kind of if we approach it kind of from a Zen moment standpoint, and we think about really getting ready, right? We want to kind of warm up. We want to get everything prepared. We want to feel really good, hopefully 30 days before enrollment starts. We've got kind of everything in place. We've made our decisions. To some degree, I think preparation for open enrollment starts right after the new plan year starts. So once the plan year starts, everything's done and rolled out, all the enrollments are complete, and then you start moving towards the next plan year. So let's talk about what that means in terms of kind of getting in shape for it. I think a lot of times we put a lot of point solutions out there. I recently participated in a benefits sort of group for our company, and I think we had 50 different vendors that we were managing and trying to pull together. So a lot of times I think we just get lost in the sheer amount of vendors and solutions that we're trying to bring to the employees. To really focus on, this is the idea of what's sort of the summary of the benefit of these benefits for your employees. What's even sort of behind them, and what are you really trying to drive? But turning those into sort of more tangible statements that employees can relate to, I think, is important. So kind of, pulling away from specific, here's our 50 solutions to, here's how they're grouped together and here's why we're bringing these solutions to you. Get your tools ready. So make decisions about what types of tools you want to use, whether it's your Ben admin platform, any sort of decision support tools you're potentially going to be rolling out. Doing maybe some blurbs as you're starting to prepare for it, just to get people excited about any new vendors you might be bringing to market. Obviously, changes you're making to benefits are important, but sometimes people just focus on, well, our premium's going up versus what's the benefit if there is a premium increase, right? And what's sort of the offset to that. So make sure you're communicating those things, because people do read them. I think to some degree we're all very concerned, about the cost of benefits, so it certainly gets people's attention. Include the decision maker, and this is a point around, remember that it's not necessarily the employee that's selecting the benefits. Oftentimes they go home, we call it that kitchen table moment, right? They sit around, and it's actually the spouse that's driving those decisions. So find ways to include the spouse if you can. And, I think hopefully we're getting better at starting to get more email addresses for spouses so that we can efficiently sort of communicate with them. But think about ways to do that. And obviously, again, you can work on that with your benefits administration vendor too. And then back to this concept of optimizing the benefits. So really kind of taking the big changes and the big focuses for the year and putting your attention to those. Typically, when we talk to employers, they'll focus on 2 or 3 big things each year, either changes they want to make, rolling out new types of benefits for certain employees. But, that's where they'll put that focus, and that's really all about sort of optimizing them. And then get organized. So, ideally, you plan your kickoff, and your kickoff hopefully is at least 30 days before open enrollment. But you really want to then plan your kickoff, another 30 days before that 30 days. You're getting everything planned and in place, and then you're starting that communication ideally at least 30 days before open enrollment. Put the information in many different places. Think of us all as not just employees, but consumers. And consumers like to do things a lot of different ways. So think about putting it in a variety of different places. If you only put it in one spot, you won't reach everyone. So, send out emails, put it on the intranet site, maybe provide it to some managers so that they can say, hey, by the way, benefits enrollment's coming up. Want to make sure you guys are aware of it, make sure you're thinking about it, and you're making plans for it. Just, think about, again, for your organization, the different variety of ways, and try to make it more than one to communicate. So the trends we're seeing in this current kind of, changing day by day environment. I think we thought kind of everything a year ago. I think we thought once we had the vaccine, things would get back to normal. And even coming into this year, into 2021, we thought we'll probably be back in the office by the fall. We are obviously seeing some impacts to that going on. So we're still seeing a lot of virtual open enrollment. And then the twist on that is that I think it does make it easier to meet for HR and benefits people to meet with smaller groups of people for enrollment sessions. You're more likely to get people to ask questions and engage if you have smaller group settings, right? I think we kind of remember those big open enrollment fairs. You get some people to come to those. More people may join these if it's 15 minutes or 30-minute sessions. You may get more employees to actually join those than you ever got to go to an open enrollment fair. So think about that. And then again, having smaller groups. And then for even smaller employers, we're seeing one-on-one meetings. So they're like, schedule time with me if you want to talk about benefits, and I'll talk to you about them, right? So, the virtual sort of world that we're living in has actually, I think, opened up some good doors as far as expanding communication to employees, and you can definitely take advantage of those. And then this is really, I think, sort of I referenced this earlier. Once open enrollment is done, the decisions have been made, go back and measure, survey, and evaluate. How did things work? We definitely recommend surveys. It's really easy to spin up internal surveys now. There's a lot of free tools to do that. Measure. So what happened? Why all of your employees look at the overall data that says, what did people pick, right? And then try to determine why. What do you think is driving some of those decisions? But definitely take that moment to pause, because you can actually do that even before the start of your plan year, because you've got kind of that moment in between open enrollment, everything's done and it's all been submitted, and now you're waiting for the new plan year to start. So that's a great time to ask those questions to people, and then try to evaluate so that you can start thinking about what worked and what didn't as you go into the next plan year. We did have a polling question. However, I don't think we've got the poll set up. So, but this, oh, sorry, Kevin, I'll go ahead and skip that one then. So Kevin, so we've gone through enrollment now. And, I think in the most benefits world, we start thinking about next year's open enrollment, but what could we be doing in between these open enrollment seasons?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would say that, engagement year round, everyone's initial reaction is be like, well, yeah, of course you have to do that. However, in theory and practice, we found a pretty disparate result, because this is an area that we have found that employers probably, spend the least time or are less deliberate about their strategy. In other words, they kind of calendar out, out what they're going to say over the course of the year, and they kind of deploy it, and they aren't really as deliberate in terms of maybe planning for it as they could. And let me give you a good reason why. If you stop and think about just the sheer reality of what probably ends up happening in open enrollment, and to me, this is all, again, hinging on this concept of around engaging people and then ultimately that engagement leading to confidence. The visual you're seeing on your screen is probably the reality of most folks, just because what ends up happening is you build up a certain amount of engagement, you get a certain amount of confidence out of employees. During that open enrollment session, it probably peaks at that open enrollment session, but then it declines and wanes over time. And then the next year you go into that cycle and you kind of end up with this kind of, a peak and valley where you don't really go any higher than where you were a year ago, and you spend a lot of time just kind of churning. And I like to say that this is an opportunity to kind of break the cycle of that reality of benefits engagement and hopefully drive an outcome that looks closer like this. And I'm greatly simplifying it, right? But what my point here is that you need to focus on building upon your past efforts. Looking at, for instance, what did you focus on last year? What did you focus on before? How can you build on top of that, right? What messages can you reinforce? For instance, looking at not just what you said this last enrollment cycle, but what you said the 2 or 3 enrollment cycles before that as well are really, really important, because that will probably influence the calendar of what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. Of course, you incorporate this into that comprehensive plan and you deploy it. And again, it doesn't matter exactly the methodology that you're going to use. It doesn't really matter the messages that you use, but it's that you are deliberate about planning exactly those 2 things. The what's and the how's are really important, and not just looking at it from a 1-year basis. Yes, you're going to deploy it on a 1-year basis, but you really have to look at this on a multi-year basis so that you can ensure that you're getting, again, that ideal outcome of long-term engagement and planning. I love that idea, too, about that Ann had spoken about engaging all of the decision makers, including, the spouse or significant other at home. And that's another area that I think, employers may offer, information and ways that for spouses and loved ones to engage. But I think, if I look at, for instance, over the last year, in looking at the results and feedback that we've gotten from employers and employees on successes and failures as being thrust into that virtual engagement environment that came with the pandemic. One of the kind of surprises that I've heard consistently is that, hey, we out of force of reality of the situation, we had to engage people virtually. We had to include and quite honestly held events that we welcomed spouses and significant others to sit in on the kind of session, if you will, and they learned a lot and they actually got much deeper engagement. Thinking about that as the reality where we're at, how can we build on that? Are there messages, for instance, that we should be inclusive of the spouse and significant others at home in my year-long, year-round deployment of education and support? So that's a great example of that. One last topic I'd talk about here is don't forget about coaching up your new hires. This is, again, one of those reactions that they're like, well, of course we have to talk with our new hires and get them through the same experience. But my question is, are you really? Because I would venture to guess that if you look at the way that, most employers are positioning the benefits engagement, the education, the components, there's so many things that have to happen during new employment orientation and onboarding that sometimes we're not realistic with each other about that we'll just say the same level of engagement is being deployed for new hires as existing hires. So you really have to be deliberate about, hey, how am I positioning new hires to be successful as my existing employees? And if there's gaps, then the second part of that is, well, okay, how am I going to close those gaps, right? And I think that's a really important component that, again, often gets missed, or maybe not as much effort is spent looking at new hires that maybe come in throughout the year as opposed to maybe what happens during open enrollment. I think I'll share another success story. This is from a large employer client of ours that, the punchline of what the statement here was is you got to make this human. And thinking about the challenges, and let's face it, in the last year there's been many of them, or last 18 months there's been many of them, very unique. But again, are we being as thorough when we're asking and answering questions like, look, how are my employees feeling outside of work? What stress, physical and mental wellness components are in play that maybe have evolved over time? And again, this probably has been exacerbated by the pandemic. I'm sure it has, for sure. I mean, I've seen a lot of surveys that employees are largely been reporting that, hey, from a career perspective, I'm actually feeling pretty good, right? But man, from a personal perspective, especially when the country was in full lockdown, it was hard. There was just stresses across all of the aspects, from financial to mental wellness, and everything in between, that quite honestly they were feeling the pinch, right? And we have to think about, hey, how does that influence our deployment of open enrollment this year and beyond? So it's really about making it human and understanding all those components and putting the effort on the front end to understand it, think about how it impacts my plans, and then taking action on what that's informing your decisions. So I know we've been talking for about 43 minutes, and we're right on time to what we thought we were going to do. We wanted to leave plenty of time for kind of questions and answers. And again, just as a reminder, if you wanted to submit a question, you can use the chat function. Make sure to put it into the chat, and don't forget to hit send. But we also we've received a few questions that have come through to the panelists, and that of so maybe Ann, I'll put you on the spot maybe to ask the first question. Is there a question you'd like to throw out that we received from the audience?
Yeah, I know there's kind of a general sort of question about what are some of the biggest, and I think especially as it relates to benefits, what are some of the biggest changes we're seeing related to benefits resulting from the past year? And I guess, that's kind of from our perspective and view on working with a lot of employers as they're sort of preparing and designing their benefits. But can you maybe pinpoint, 2 or 3 things that you think are really big changes coming out of 2020?
Yeah, so there's 2 that immediately come to my mind, and I think these are really important when you're thinking about open enrollment. Number 1 is what has happened with the utilization of preventative services, right? So what we have seen, and this has been reported broadly across many different outlets, so this won't come as a surprise, is that, and initially it was because probably, and when we were first in I'll call it the lockdown phase of the pandemic, you couldn't go to see primary care physicians. But then what ended up happening is that, quite honestly, life creeps up on us and we don't make it a priority to do those things. And I think it's going to be something we're really going to have to focus on as employers and as an industry to get people back engaged in that notion of, hey, I need to go, seek out and utilize my preventative services. So that's definitely one that I highly encourage you guys to focus on this year. Another one, well, and every year, but I think it's especially important this year. The second one I think is the proliferation of telemedicine. The telemedicine is a great service because it's convenient and it provides access for people that maybe wouldn't have sought service anyways, or maybe as a cost savings move. I think it got a big boost in the arm because quite honestly, a lot of providers had to move into kind of telemedicine, even if it wasn't a formal telemedicine service. I think people are now forced to feel comfortable in engaging with a doctor at a distance like that, and I think that means that telemedicine is probably the utilization and comfort level within employees is probably going to accelerate in the future. So I would say that those are 2 really important trends. And then I think the third one we already covered, but I'll just remind it, is really the need to engage virtually, but really what that means and being able to, I think initially it was just like, well, I'll just do a bunch of webinars, right? But now we have to think about, well, can I do some small group settings or even facilitate one-on-one sessions on a virtual basis to help with that? And I think, the utilization of decision support, I think, is one of those examples that will also get a shot in the arm over the next couple of years because of that as well. Good question.
So another question I just saw, because I think someone had a good point around oftentimes renewal rates are not decided. We see this a lot with the insurance companies until the last minute. So, right, there's a lot of just hemming and hawing and the pressure's there, but they come in really late. I think generally, I think that does make it hard to obviously communicate at least the hard cost of what the benefits will be, because you just don't have those numbers yet. But I do think that's still an opportunity maybe to focus on other aspects of the benefits besides just the cost of the plans. And maybe that's a way to sort of stage it, knowing that sometimes those decisions are delayed. I know, Kevin, we sometimes see that too, and employers do struggle with that just because a lot of times the insurance companies don't get things locked down until very late in the year.
Yeah, and then it's probably more impactful to the insured population rather than self-employed population. But and you're absolutely right. But this is all the more reason to underscore the importance of starting from a strategy, because ultimately the plan economics are going to fold into that regardless of what they are, regardless of whether you got a renewal that came in flat, whether you got a renewal that went up by X, Y, or Z. It shouldn't deviate you within reason. It shouldn't deviate with you from the long-term objectives. You may have to respond in a given scenario, and if you stop and think about what we've seen over the last 18 months of the pandemic is a lot of carriers were somewhat in neutral because they didn't know what was going to happen with utilization, maybe didn't know what was going to happen with expenses associated with COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So I think there was somewhat of flat trends in the market. I think undoubtedly you're going to see pressure in the future on plans from those components, and because of obviously when you infuse trillions of dollars into the economy, it will have an economic impact at some point on inflation, and I think that's going to be felt over the next couple of years as we go into renewal cycles. but that shouldn't take you away from the core of what you're trying to achieve. So establishing that strategy and moving in that direction, regardless of what comes down the pike, is really the aim. But at the same time, you're going to have to pivot. No one saw the pandemic coming, right? Nobody thought in January of last year that all of a sudden 2 months later we'd find ourselves in complete lockdown and what that was going to do to the businesses and so on and so forth. So you got to respond to what's there, but it shouldn't take you away from your true north strategy from your benefits.
And Kevin, just kind of one that'll be in your sweet spot from a legislative perspective. Do you see any legislation that is coming in the future related to changing people's ability to use the HSA that have TRICARE?
Yeah, so there's a lot of bills in Congress at any point, and this Congress is no different than any of the preceding Congresses. Many more ideas, many more bills come out in terms of ideas, but very few are passed. I would say that the current administration's priorities have really been around managing the impacts of the pandemic, and obviously vaccination and economic stimulus and all of those things that go into there. I would say that by and large, wide sweeping healthcare changes have kind of taken a back seat for right now. I mean, again, we got midterms coming up next year, so that could radically alter the environment. But I would say that for right now, smaller tweaks and improvements are probably the likely outcome. Obviously, I was hoping that there were going to be some components of something like that where they may be eliminating the restriction around TRICARE and Indian Health Services and VA benefits and things like that, or other things like permanent extension of the telemedicine allowance for HDHPs and HSA programs. That would maybe get attached onto an infrastructure bill. Chance it didn't happen, at least not to this point. I would say that it's a possibility in the budget reconciliation process to see what may end up coming out of it. I would say that these ideas actually have pretty wide sweeping bipartisan support. But I would say sometimes that support doesn't necessarily translate into a law getting passed. Other ideas like, HSAs within Medicare, or at least allowing working seniors with HSAs that want to maybe continue contributing that may have been forced into Medicare A because of Social Security benefits or something like that. Look, there's plenty of bills. There's lots of support, and I would say that those things are important. Honestly, employer voices matter much more than probably anyone else in our industry. So please talk to your. I think we've reached our time, so I do want to let you know of a couple resources that are new and available to the audience. At HSA Bank, we had recently announced and released a playbook for open enrollment, and I don't know why my slides are not advancing, but the URL for there it is. All right, so the URL for the Open Enrollment Fitness Training Playbook, we're calling it, that has a lot more information that we covered off today can be accessed in using this URL. So hsabank.com /playbook 2021. It's free. You don't have to be a customer or a partner of ours to access it. I encourage you to take a look at that as a resource. And the last thing I want to do is, again, just thank you for your time. Thank you on behalf of myself and Ann, thank you on behalf of the rest of our organization and the PSCA. Again, if you have any other questions, you'd like to have more information, our contact information is on the screen. All of this is in the handout and available for download as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you and have a great rest of the day.
Great. Thanks, everybody.